Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Lunatics. It's me, Phil. I'm here for another great interview. Last episode, we had Greg Wright. This time, of course, yes, we have Mark McLaurin. Yes.
I'm not a comparison to Greg. I don't know.
Why? Why not?
I don't swear as much.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, who does? But yes, you heard Mark and Greg on a previous episode of the Chichester chat. So
yeah.
I wanted to I wanted to talk to both of you separately, but especially you. Like, I'm not familiar as much with but I was going through your list. I was like, oh yeah, he did. You've done stuff here, there, and because it's like Greg. Like I said, Greg did like every other thing in the '90s.
Yeah. Greg was very busy. I was trying to be targeted. I mean, I edited a lot. The thing I liked about becoming an editor was I got to kind of pick the projects I wanted to, sponsor as an editor. And did different kinds of projects.
But you did a lot of things. Like, you were an editor, you're a writer, you're a penciler, colorist. I mean, you basically did everything you could on a comic, didn't you?
Yeah, that was my goal. When I first got to Marvel, I was like, I want to do everything.
Nice. I mean, it helps get get some work. Be like, okay, well, I can color this, I can pencil this, I can write this. Yeah. So did you know early on you wanted to be a writer and get in the comics, or did that come later?
It happened. I knew early I really wanted to do it. I used to draw my own comics when I was a kid from like middle school on. I filled volumes with like serialized characters, like in the Tales of Suspense tradition, and I would just make up the story as I went along and try to find a good place to end it on a cliffhanger and then pick up another one.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of fun.
So did you ever take any of those characters and like try to work them into a comic or anything?
No, I think they're all really juvenile characters. I mean, there was a character who put on a unique space suit, and because he was shattered by beta rays, he basically decorporealized and became just the suit. He got powers, but the suit just contained his energy.
Oh, okay.
And that was I called him Ultron before I knew that there was an Ultron. I think. I hope.
I mean, that doesn't sound too juvenile. I mean, I've heard and read worse. But then, I say then you started as an assistant editor, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's another thing I did when I went to Pratt. I went to Pratt for art school because I wanted to be an artist, and I had two paths I could go as a writer or as an artist, and I like drawing, so I went to art school. And in art school, I my junior year with a friend of mine, I started a club, a comics club. Which we called the Comic Illustrators Guild, which was silly. And they have a new name for it now. It's called the Comic Club, which makes more sense.
It's still going there.
It's still going. They're having their 40th anniversary issue, and I'm going to be interviewed for that, and along with a student, one of the students who helped me form it. But it was cool because we all like comics. We all went to art school, but there was never the friend I started with was a cartoonist. He wanted to be a cartoonist. And so he did that and I did this, and neither of them were appreciated at an art school. Yet there were people who were going to that art school who did comics all the time. I mean, went to school with Kent Williams, with George Pratt, and, a bunch of guys. And they all wanted to do comics, but they never did. So they didn't do it in the school. They just basically went out and started working at Epic. Or working for Epic as freelancers. And I was like, we should have a comic here. And all I had to do is put together a proposal and budget it. And then they let us have money to print it every semester. And it's still in existence 40 years later.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. Like, you guys started it and it just kept getting handed down when someone would leave. Wow.
And the way I got into Marvel, I probably can tell this story now.
Long enough.
Yeah, I had a teacher who was amazing, Amy Schneider, and she was the art education teacher. I had a minor in art education, And she said, "What are you going to do when you get out of school?" I was like, "I don't know. I really want to work for Marvel. That would be my ideal." And she said, "Well, let's get you an internship there." This is near the end of my senior year, like really, like totally near the end. And in fact, it was, they weren't supposed to open up internships, but she did. So basically, it was an unpaid internship. I got into Marvel. I was working on the official history of the Marvel Universe Deluxe Edition with Mark Gruenwald. I was in Mark Gruenwald's office, and that's where I met like David Wall and Mark Siri and Michael Yee, all a bunch of people that worked for comics. They worked in comics right out of high school, and so I worked with them. And then basically, when a position came up, basically under Archie Goodwin with Epic as the Epic secretary, and I was like, I will take any job. So I applied for that, and I said, I just graduated now, so I'm done. I would love this job, and they hired me. So, and they went from like the secretary, which was called I think it was editorial assistant. I went to be an assistant editor, and then to a managing editor, which I learned later is the opposite, and then from managing editor to a full editor.
Yeah, because I know like Dan and Greg both say like Epic was such like a great training ground for like comics careers and stuff. Yeah,
just especially just under Archie, he's like such a creative guy, and he hired creative people and knew how to, take things in unique directions and without sort of loading it over you or being the expert in anything. He was just a person, which was cool.
And you did mention another one of my like all-time favorites, and I did bug Greg a little bit about stories about him, Mark Gruenwald. I loved Mark Gruenwald's writing, and
he was an amazing person. And Greg probably went on and on about him, and anyone that had met him would go on and on about him.
Oh yeah, anyone I've asked who knew him was he was
so full of energy, so full of ideas, so full of just positivity. He would make you excited about anything you were doing. And he was always working to make the comics generally better. And that was cool.
And it seemed like he was like a fan, like he knew the history, he knew his comics history, it seemed like.
Yeah, he was the encyclopedist. He and Peter Sanderson, who brought his scholarly information or mindset to the history of the Marvel Universe. He wrote whatever comic that was that told the history of the Marvel Universe from like early days, like from the creation of the planet, and is told it in chronological order. I can't remember what it was called, but Mark was the person that you went to check on anything as a writer if you weren't sure, as an editor if you weren't sure about something. He's like, he just kept it all up there.
Oh yeah, it seemed like he knew everything. It's like, okay, this like the 80s or 90s, it seemed like it was Mark. It's like, okay, this is how this person's powers work. This is how time travel works in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, which was cool because before that, it just existed in his head, and he came up with the idea of like, it shouldn't exist in my head. We should write this down in a book, which is where he got the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, just character by character, explaining whatever you needed for consistency. It was a tool for editors to know consistency, to know where to look back at a character who started or did something, and where to find characters, obscure characters that you might want to use, rather than, because Mark was a big stickler for, if you want to create a character with a specific power, look to see if there's already a character with that power, and preferably reuse that one, because then you end up with two characters with the same powers and it just gets messy.
Oh yeah. All right. So you're an editor at Epic. Where do you go from there?
I was editorial assistant at Epic. And then from there, the next position that came up was an assistant editor for Carl Potts. Actually, was it Carl? I worked for a minute for Danny Fingeroth. I think I got a position with him first.
Okay.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. Trying to put things in chronological order and puzzle pieces fall out of place. I got the position with, I think I became Danny Fingeroth's assistant editor, and Danny's a nice guy, but we didn't get along. And so when a position came up under Carl Potts, I moved over to there, and we got along. I learned a lot from Carl. Carl was like an amazing storyteller, as an artist who became an editor. He knew how to train people in storytelling. He found amazing artists. He found Jim Lee. He found Wills Portacio. He found like a lot of those initial people. He had brought them in and given them their first work, which was really cool. Scott Williams.
Oh wow.
So I wanted to have the ability to find great people like that, just to look through and be able to see somebody and give them their big break.
Yeah, like we talked to Dan about Epic and stuff, and like I missed the Epic train just because it's like until probably like 93 or 94 at least. I didn't, if there was a direct market, there was like an actual comic shop near me, I didn't know about it. I was at the mercy of like newsstands and spinner racks.
And Epic was not on newsstands.
No. Yeah. That's like, I'm like, I missed so much good stuff just because I didn't have access to do like an actual comic shop until I was probably like at least 14 or 15. I was like, what the?
Yeah. It's great. It was a great time because Epic got to tell different kinds of stories. Epic had come up behind Epic Illustrated, and people, I remember when I was a little kid, Epic Illustrated I liked because it was like heavy metal and they had nudity in it. So, but yeah, it was just like a lot of different kinds of artists, a lot of different types of stories, and then when that magazine died, they just basically said, let's take this idea and make it into series.
Yes,
which was cool.
And I know Dan's always talking about like Clive Barker. Did you get to meet Clive Barker?
Yeah.
Him at all? Yeah.
I worked with Clive and I became his editor on Hellraiser, which I think I got from Dan when Dan left. And it started Hellraiser. And I wrote a story for Dan. And then when Dan left, I took on Hellraiser and Nightbreed and the comic that came out of Hellraiser, which was oh man, I can't remember it. I can see the logo, but I can't remember it. It's I want to say Marauders. That's not the right word. Anyways, I worked on a lot of his stuff, and it was really cool. I sort of had an eye for those types of stories, even though that wasn't my genre as far as being a writer. I want to find horror stories that still sort of, the bad guy gets it in the end, not like there's this TV show that's on I think it's Amazon, and it's called Urban Legends, and everyone is based on an urban legend, and it's just about something happening bad at the beginning and then bringing it to its ultimate horribleness at the end. That's the shocker. The thing that you were afraid of at the beginning happens at the end. I never liked those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
It surprised you in some way.
I think that's like the genre of fiction, like a lot of people like. It's like you see somebody, like TV shows have done it, like The Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt, where it's like, someone does something bad in the beginning of the episode, and it's like, oh wait, guess what? Their bad behavior had consequences. Now they're dead or whatever. Yeah.
But it wasn't. I love stuff. I love Twilight Zone, but I didn't like the idea of it. Just didn't seem creative to me to set up a bad thing to happen at the beginning of the story and then take a really long time and at the very end say, the bad thing happened that you knew at the beginning. It did happen, even though you're trying to stop it all the way through. It just happened.
Yeah. Some of those I was rewatching some Twilight Zones, and I was just like, you get a good premise. You're like, well, they didn't explain this. It was like 20 some minutes. They didn't explain this. They didn't explain this. It just stuff just happened.
Yeah. Which I kind of like. I mean, comics, the thing with comics is that you can have that people love that mystery of saying there's something behind this that you don't know. And there's still something behind this that you don't know. And then eventually someone feels they have to come forward and say, here's the answer to that mystery. And it's like, okay, it's not as interesting now.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too. I mean, about like modern comics, you really don't get that anymore. But it's like, back in the 80s, 90s, like people would write a book for a year. So it's like, okay, we're going to set something up here. Might not pay it off for a year or two, but it's coming.
Oh yeah, and then Chris Claremont was famous for that. He would set up so many subplots and then just have so many to pick from.
Remember that thing I wrote 10 years ago? Yeah, here's the answer.
Yeah. But I mean, I envied him in that ability to, set up mysteries in advance, to leave enough mystery, to be able to talk about enough so people were interested in the character, but leave enough as a mystery that you have time to reveal stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he was like that, but as a writer, it's like, can you like set stuff up like that? And then it's just like, are some people just like, okay, let's see what the reader reacts to. You know, if they react to plot A, I'll go with that. If not, I'll
Yeah.
go with plot. Yeah.
I'm the way I did it and the way I worked with editors when I was a writer, and the way that I asked people to work with me as an editor was to get in a series. I'd ask them to write like a year in advance, just like a half a paragraph this issue, half a paragraph this issue, and just 12 issues. And you know, that would allow you to the writer start thinking about, here's where I'm going to drop this in, here's where I'm going to give this backstory, and just be able to understand the arc of one story ending and the other story picking up, you know, and just that constant shift, which, you know, is like the Lost in Space version from comics, where you have to start something up before and then lead into something else.
Is that usually how it goes in comics, where it's like, okay, the editor's like, okay, give me the breakdown of, well, the first arc at least, and just.
I honestly don't know how it works anymore, but I feel like there's a sense, the comics I've read or I still read, I don't get a sense that they have an idea of what they want to do. And if they do have a sense of what they want to do, there's like a dichotomy that was always there. And that, again, back to Mark Gruenwald, he used to bring all the assistant editors to a conference, to a thing where at an assistant editor school, and he would teach us about specific things to be able to be editors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really great. I was there. We got, it was camaraderie. It was at one of those gatherings that one of the assistant editors cut off Mark's ponytail, and they were acting like it was a joke. And then he actually ran up and cut his hair, and it was like, oh my God, you just cut his ponytail. He's like been growing that for years. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I take it too far. And it turned out it was a joke that both of them had worked out ahead of time. Mark wanted to cut it off. So he just said, we'll do it in front of everybody, and I'll act like I'm really pissed at you for doing it.
Oh, wow.
I think it was Glenn Herdling who did that.
Oh, jeez. Oh man, if there was, I was gonna say, did they ever like video any of those classes or conferences? I mean, I'd sit there. I'm a huge comic nerd. I'd sit there and watch that.
Yeah, no, I know we had a handbook of the stuff that they learned from there, and I've been looking for it because Carl Potts had asked me, because I was an assistant editor and he was an editor, but the assistant editor's handbook basically outlines everything you need to know to be able to do a Marvel comic. And they, you know, one lesson at a time. Again, Mark saw a need for something that didn't exist. It's like, we need to pass this knowledge on. We need to be able to make sure that we're all doing stuff consistently. And I'd have never heard of that type of passing knowledge on at any other place. It's either you know how to do it intuitively, or you do it by trial and error to figure it out. But he would go down and say, here's how this works. Here's how this works. And once you start seeing that, you start seeing how people take a unique path to do the same thing. They're doing this, you know, you're introducing a big baddie. They get beaten and then they get better, and then they get beaten and they get better. Like really what happened, the plot of The Incredibles, you know, until you're at the final climactic scene where you have this overpowered character against, you know, it seemed like he was like the hero had the advantage at the beginning, but now the other guy does. And so it's a life and death struggle, which was, you know, it just helped. And you could see, man, what is his name? I can't remember people's names, but there was one of the editors actually took a Japanese comic and photocopied it and said, here's the steps. Here's the exact same pattern that you can see in American comics, you know, just like introducing something and establishing the stakes, and, you know, keeping the character weak until they become too powerful for the hero, because then the hero actually has something at stake.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole Mark thing, it sounds like he's, you know, that's a sign of a good editor, a good boss in general, where it's basically like, okay, let me show you some stuff. This is how I do it. Either take this or make it your own. But yeah, you know, instead of just get this done, it's like, here, let me show you how to get this done.
Yeah, he was great at that. And he just knew that stuff in advance. And it was his idea to do stuff like the Halloween costume party at Marvel. you know, at Marvel when I was there were glass offices, like glass fronts, and Mark basically needed extra room because he had a lot of flat files. You know, flat files are the big wide things that hold the comic book pages, and he wanted to be able to have room in the office without having everything tower above him. So he physically built a platform for him and initially Howard Mackey and then later Greg, so that when people walked into the office, they were looking up at them. And they loved that. But then they used that space and they took those comic make readies, basically printer proofs of comic covers, and we get them every week or for every comic that was published. And he would take, instead of tossing them, he took them and crumpled them up into balls and threw the balls into that area until it was high as their desks. And then they did jumps off of it into the piles of paper. Falling back. It was yeah, and that's his idea. No one said, "Hey Mark, how about?" No, he just said, "Let's do this."
Oh wow.
That was his level of creativity.
Well, like back then, like back in like the 90s and stuff, like how much of the workforce would you say was actually in the New York office?
Freelancers were all around.
Oh yeah.
They were all over the country, including, you know, other countries. But
like, were the majority of the creatives in the New York office or not?
Well, when I was there, it's just exactly at the time of transition, where you'd have writers, letterers writing the word balloons on paper, on the boards, ideally, and then later, because they had to do two steps at the same time, on sheets of vellum that then they'd send into the bullpen, and they'd cut out the vellum and rubber cement it down onto the boards, which is why you started seeing that. It's basically because something was really late. And then it was transitioning to everything being digital. Comic Craft had just started up when I was there. And they started, you know, being able to do all kinds of effects completely digitally. But all of which is to say, the thing that people did in New York, all the colorists, because they needed those at the last minute, all the letterers, not all of them, many of them. No, not all of them, but very many of them, because they tried to cut those corners as quickly as possible. And sometimes sending something out FedEx overnight was a loss of a day. Yeah. And so, you know, letterers would come in and just say, "You got any work? Here you go. We got these 3 pages. Why don't you take these?" And they were smart. If they were smart, which most of them were, they would make regular stops, because the editors would trust them more if they can pull the editor out of a fire, and then they would want to give them more work when there wasn't a deadline. It wasn't such a rush deadline, which was good.
I guess my weird roundabout way of asking it's just like, do you think there was more? Did you like it better being face to face with people? Because again, now it's like with technology, it's great. I mean, you can have talent from anywhere in the world, but it's like people are probably Zoom calls now more than they are actually like meeting face to face. So
yeah, I mean, at Marvel, I preferred seeing people face to face. I liked bringing people out to lunch and talking about stuff over lunch, and being able to resolve things face to face, because the phone just didn't work that way. Today, I was saying the other day, I have to make phone calls. I have to make phone calls regularly, and I dread it. And it was all because of Marvel, because I had to be, you know, okay, I got to make like 10 phone calls. I will set aside time from 1 to 2, or from, you know, 10 to 11 to make these phone calls, because it was calling out to California or something, or the end of the day, vice versa. And so it's really hard for me to work on the phone now. I can do it, but I dread it ahead of time, and then I do it.
Yeah, I think it's anything, you know, whatever you do in your formative years, that's what you're used to. And yeah, I know.
But it's always been preferable to me I think there's a different energy. Being face to face.
Yeah, because like they always used to have summits, right? Like again, like especially in the 90s, like the Spider-Man had 4 books. All the teams got together and were like, okay, what are we doing this year? And who's doing what in the crossover. And
I did that. We tried to do that a lot with the Razor line. We had crossovers. And Clive would be there, and he would, all the writers would get together and just bang heads. It was in that group was Clive, who was then Larry Wachowski, who became Lana Wachowski, and Steve Scroce, who was working on that book on Ecto Kid, and Sarah Byam, the Fred Burke, Frank Lavecchia. Those are all the writers. And then with them, we got to find a whole bunch of new artists, which was really exciting for me. One of the best artists I liked working with, because I loved his stuff, even though he was like less than 100% reliable, Paris Collins. I love his stuff. I still to this day love his stuff. But people would hesitate to hire him for anything other than a fill-in, because he would take longer than a month to do it. And really working on a regular monthly series, and you want to have a team on it, they have to be able to do that 22 pages in 30 days. And if they can't, then they can't do comics.
That's the nature of comics, right? Because it's like you could be the most beautiful artist in the world, but if you don't have the speed, you're not getting jobs.
Yeah, well, I mean, then you got to do like
regular jobs. Yeah.
Kevin Nolan, guys like Kevin Nolan, they just did graphic novels, and people would love them because they're amazing looking. And they couldn't. I guess he did for a while, but it'd be difficult for him to work on a monthly series.
So, well, okay, let's segue there. Speaking of art, when did you become a penciler or inker for the first time?
I went to art school.
I mean, like for Marvel, I guess.
Yeah. Once I got up to, I think, assistant editor level, I started doing freelance for Marvel, which meant basically doing the coloring and just learning from people around me, how to do it and how to do it quickly. I never learned how to do lettering. I was never good at that. I still am not good at that. But and I would do sketches as an editor. I would do sketches, drawings, because that's what I learned from Carl Potts. Do drawings to say this is the design for the cover that we want to put on there, because that we could design something that's going to sell. Like the crying baby, the baby that cries the loudest is the one you pick up. So and then from there, my dream would have been to do a comic. That would have been my dream, to draw a comic. But I couldn't do 22 pages in 30 days. I just couldn't. But I could write 22 pages and script them. So that's when I started to do more writing. And my goal when I started out at Marvel, Marvel Comics Presents was a great training ground. Yes. And so you just do these, is it 6 or 8? I think they're 8-page stories.
I think so, yeah.
And I approached to do every Black character at Marvel. So I did a comic of Cloak. I did a comic of Blade, Vampire Slayer. I did a comic of The Thing, because I consider The Thing Black. And also the last one I did was Luke Cage. And that was when he was, on the run. And that served as a leaping point to be able to hand in a proposal for Luke Cage at that point, in a comic that became Cage. And it got approved. And that was the most fun I had at Marvel, was with a time when I was editing a bunch of comics and then writing a comic that I really liked.
Oh, wow.
Well, the first one I applied for, that I did a proposal for, was Alpha Flight. And Fabian Nicieza beat me out on that.
Oh, jeez.
And I still think my idea would have been better, but Fabian's a better writer today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that, but I mean, yeah, I love Alpha Flight too. There's something about Alpha Flight. Like, I know a lot of people, whether they're, creatives or just like readers, so many people love Alpha Flight. I don't know why they're not getting more, why aren't they in the MCU? Why aren't they this? Why, everywhere.
I think there was 3 different series. I mean, after I was under Carl as an assistant editor, and that was my first title. Basically, he said, "You do Alpha Flight. We'll put both our names on it, because I'm overseeing what you're doing, but you're going to be the editor of that series."
Oh, wow.
And so I became the editor. First, I was working with Bill Mantlo, and then I was working with James Hudnall, and I think that was it. At that point, I got I got tapped to become a managing editor, which in every other job, managing editor is above editor. But at Marvel, managing editor was below editor because you were an editor just managing, meaning you were still working under an editor. And so then I did that for a bit, and I think I can't even remember the series I worked on at that point. But then I got promoted to full editor, and I got to get my own stable of titles, and that was really cool. I had fun doing that. Around then, I also under Carl, I got the opportunity to do a Punisher story arc because Bill Mantlo left. Not Bill Mantlo. Mike Barron was unceremoniously escorted off the Punisher, which was unfortunate because I liked his stories. But then they needed somebody to finish up his storyline. And the storyline happened to be one that I'm very embarrassed about today, but it's the one where Punisher turns black.
Yeah, and it was Luke Cage in there too. Yeah.
And so I had gotten Luke Cage at that point, and they were like, we can promote Luke Cage. The Punisher will be black, and he just they need to have an adventure together. And by the end of the adventure, the Punisher's turning back. The melanin injections he got are going away, and the surgery he got is going away. Which I don't understand how that worked, but yeah.
I mean, again, everyone's a great writer, but it's like in the 90s, I feel like every writer at Marvel either worked on Spider-Man and the Punisher at least once, whether it was in their own book or a guest star somewhere. Yeah.
That was on purpose because Punisher and Spider-Man were huge sellers.
Well. Yeah, those two X-Men, especially Wolverine, yeah.
And if you could get any of them in your book, then people in the distributors or the comic book store owners would say, this is going to have the Punisher in it. I'm going to order a few more of these and hopefully boost, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing.
Yeah, because it seemed like a lot of Marvel comics, like the first issue had Spider-Man guest star, and then by somewhere in the first 10 issues, you had either the Punisher or Wolverine or both show up.
Yeah, because you're going to get a lot of numbers on the first issue.
Yeah.
From there, they used to say the first issue would be this number, the second issue would be half of that number, and the third issue would be like 3/4 of that number. And so, you wanted to keep the numbers up. You wanted to do something to like re-inject and ideally pull new readers in to get who like the Punisher to like your character or get exposed to your character and see what the book's about.
Mm-hmm.
Which meant you had to write the character correctly.
Yeah. And I mean, the 90s were probably the craziest because, all those speculators were like, this #1 with the foil cover is going to be worth a ton of money someday.
Yeah. That was horrible. And I personally, my opinion, I blame Ron Perlman, who bought Marvel and then basically was trying to build a media empire. And his whole idea of a media empire was like, you have to keep the titles above this amount. I mean, comics got canceled when I was there, which had higher numbers than ones which they consider a success today, which was it's just backwards. I mean, they're really good comics too. I mean, I worked on a series with Clive Barker, the Razorline series. I'm still proud of that series. It couldn't have the Punisher in it. It couldn't have Spider-Man. Yeah. It was just a new set of characters, but they were all really, really cool. I mean, really seriously dramatic, yet still in the comics code. Hyperkind, for example, about 4 kids who get these powers, but they're not just, rough around the edge kids. There's a kid who has a drug problem as a superhero. There's a girl who was sexually abused as a child and basically was becoming a prostitute. She got these powers, and just how it changed their lives, how they had to adapt to their traumas and their issues from the start, because they were experiencing issues that kids experience to some degree. The most traumatic experiences that you could imagine somebody as a teenager going through. They were starting the series that way.
And I mean, that's the other thing, like all that epic stuff, none of that was ever collected in like any kind of collection, was it?
I don't think so. And that's a reason for that. and that is that it's Epic, it's creator owned. All the rights and the books go back to the creators, and often that means if it's a writer, an artist, and an inker, a writer and pencil and an inker, it means the book gets split up. So they actually physically have to get back together and put those all together and then find a way to publish it.
Wow. So it's not like it's not just you gotta get these 3 people to sign off on this. No, they actually have to like come together to do something.
Well, yeah, because Marvel at that point, it was creator owned. If they felt like there was a good market for it, they would definitely put a trade paperback out and then be excited about how it sold. But as they decided to go around or turn away from creator owned model, because everybody else was doing it better, I think that option became less and less an option.
Because that's the other thing I was going to ask you, because you did work on Marvel Comics Presents. They really haven't they haven't collected a lot of that. Like, of course, the Weapon X stuff they did. Like, even on the Marvel Unlimited app, it's just like, oh, here's the issue, but it's only the 8-page Wolverine story. So is it just because there's so many creators? Because there was like, what, 4 or 5 stories in each issue? So it's like, how many creators you'd have to get?
I know that they have collected the Weapon X stuff.
They have that. Yeah, of course.
And they recently collected the Firestar limited series that I wrote with Marie Javins. And that was put into the collection of Firestar. And so that series is there. I think they have to find the character, and that the character, I don't know why they published Firestar. Maybe it was at the time that they were doing a new cartoon with Firestar in it, but it's usually a cross marketing reason why they would do something. But I couldn't tell you how many. If it's a really popular series, then it would likely be collected.
Yeah, because I mean, I just don't get it, because I can think of at least one big long segment. I think it was the early Marvel Comics Presents. There was a Black Panther story. I'm like, why aren't we reprinting that? I mean, there's been 2 Black Panther movies. Why aren't we reprinting Black Panther stuff?
I don't know why they're not. I knew why they weren't then, and that was, there was a sense that they didn't know what to do with the Black Panther. Don McGregor wrote the Black Panther great, fantastically, but it didn't carry enough of an audience. Specifically, like the Black Panther in Marvel Comics Presents, they would have one story that was on the cover that was hopefully selling it, and then the other ones were like sidebars. So you want to, Weapon X, they feature whenever, as long as it was Weapon X, he was always on the cover. But it was really hard to get them to pay attention to some of the other storylines, even though they were really great. They weren't hooking people necessarily. And so Black Panther, ideally that long story arc should have led to Black Panther getting his own comic again. Didn't happen.
Oh no, I mean, he didn't get his own series again to what, like the late 90s, I think.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of people weren't selling. I mean, again, that was the whole Heroes Reborn thing, right? The Avengers weren't selling, the Fantastic Four weren't selling. Again, the 90s, it was Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Punisher propping up the house there.
Yeah, and that was right around the time that they had their first and second downsizing.
Yeah.
And that I think, took a lot of spirit out. I know, I was not in the first round of letting people go, but I was there and aware of how it felt at Marvel offices, the place where like people would spend extra time to get something done because that was your job. Spend the night if you need to get something done. Figure out the way to make sure that you stayed on the schedule and that you had high levels of quality. And after the downsizing, when everyone said, wow, they just let people go, like all these people, and the spirit of energy and the willingness to bend over backwards for everybody took a real severe hit.
Oh, I'm sure. And
the spirit at Marvel didn't feel right anymore. And I think even, I know Mark felt it, and I think he was the heart of Marvel. And I think, I don't think it was an accident I think it was an accident, but I think it was not ironic, but actually fitting, that he died of a heart attack because
Mm.
Marvel had gutted him, with all that they were then suddenly requiring. And just he was such a positive person, and he had to see like tons of his friends go by the wayside.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, everyone I've talked to who knew him say, yeah, what a great guy he was. And again, I mean, if he was still around, he'd be my number one wish list for to
And he should be. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
Just, if you can find some videos from old San Diego Comic Cons, they would have a Marvel panel, and they would say, "We're giving you this room for the Marvel panel, whatever that is." And then Mark would come up with something incredibly wacky that was incredibly fun and would entertain an entire auditorium full of people, rather than people going in and just talking about a comic. They would actually be doing something, really interesting and entertaining. And that was all because Mark said, we're going to this conference again. We can talk and promote our stuff, but it's like, the Tonight Show stuff when they can go and they can talk to the host, but the real fun stuff was when they do the skits.
Yes.
And he would do the skits all the time.
I mean, it's usually the case 99% of the time, but I mean, anymore, you never know. But I'm so happy when like a writer I've loved, and I just hear when they're a good person. I'm like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. Because that was a thing at Marvel too. When I came in, I was a fanboy. I loved all the stuff, and when I got in there, I geeked over a couple people, and then realized that they really didn't like it. And so I sort of pulled back and just got, and then, it's a difference between seeing somebody and be like, oh my God, you're you. And it's like, instead of saying, hey, I really like your work. I really like this, especially, that was cool. And that difference was a big deal. And I was the former before I was the latter. I remember I was at a party at Kieran Dwyer's apartment, because Kieran was roommates with a couple of my friends, and why am I telling that story? Bill Sienkiewicz came to that party. Oh, wow. If there was one artist I wanted to meet and would geek out over, it was Bill Sienkiewicz. And I was like, I went up to him, I was like, oh my God, you're so awesome. It's like, I thought I was coming to a party with a bunch of friends who knew each other. How come this guy's assaulting me? So I sort of pulled back after that. That was my wake-up call.
You just feel the overwhelming need to ask questions, especially on the art side. Be like, oh, how do you do this? And
yeah. But I mean, it's really hard for someone to talk about techniques at a party with your beer in your hand.
Yeah.
You can do that in your studio. You can do that, where you can see the comic or whatever. You can talk about it, but just talking about it intellectually didn't work to communicate art changes or art techniques, which I was in awe of how he did stuff. I still am. He's still working, and his stuff's still amazing. I see it on his Facebook page all the time.
All right, I'm going to ask you this question. All right, you've pretty much done it all in comics. Is there a job you love more than the others? The writing, the editing, the penciling is one of your favorite over the rest?
My favorite really was editing. I really liked. I mean, as a writer, you come up with your own ideas. You play around with them in your head. You make them into the best shape, and then you try to write them down. I once saw this comic that had 4-panel comic strip, and the guy had an idea, and it was a thought bubble with like this beautiful butterfly, and in the thought bubble, and the thought bubble's there in the second panel, and he lifts up a book and he slaps it shut, and then when he opens it back up, it's like you see the dead, beautiful butterfly with all the colors going all over the place. And that's the process. You have this great idea, but getting it down can sometimes really kill it. The thing I liked was the collaborative process in being an editor, because I didn't just first you hire really good people that have good ideas. Then you talk to them and you inspire them to do better. I always liked that they said, Louise Simonson. That was a Louise Simonson method. If it was a good comic, it's because it was a good team that the editor was able to help and that had good ideas. If it was a bad comic, it's because of the editor.
Mm.
So and I believe in that. So I like to be able to add stuff or bring something to the party, and without ever being like, you need to do it this way. This is the way you should do it. I would be like, how about if this happened? What if you did that? And it's like, that was fun.
I mean, I think it makes, yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, just with the stuff you're doing and stuff, it seems like you like to teach, or how more than anything, right?
Yeah. I'm a collaborator, but yeah, I like seeing the ideas that come out of other people with my influence as much as I like, or even more than I like my ideas, because I always feel like after I make something, it's that strip again. I see after it's done how it could have been better. How I needed an editor, and that's what I tried to bring to other people. But I've never had that for myself. Well, I had that on Cage with Kelly, but Kelly Crevice left me to my own devices a lot. He checked my year-long thing. He made sure that we had the rights for crossovers. He would correct stuff or add something to it, but he didn't, from my recollection, he wasn't like, make this happen. What if you tried this, and I kind of like that, and I liked to do that for others.
Well, that's what I also want to get to. Cage. I mean, was there pressure there? Like, I mean, it had been a few years since like Luke Cage had been like around full time in the Marvel universe. Was that kind of?
Yeah, and I was always hating the way. I mean, as a reader, I read the last issue of Power Man Iron Fist, and that ended with Danny Rand being dead and missing, or seeming to be dead and missing, and Luke Cage being accused of killing him, even though there was no body per se. But he's an ex-con, so and then so that's how it ended, and then nobody ever picked it up.
Yeah,
I was like, that's awful. How can they leave this character who's like such a high potential character and just leave him out there? And so what I tried to do was bring him back after Iron Fist came back to life under John Byrne and was doing all this stuff. It bothered me that Iron Fist came back and didn't look for Luke. It's like your best friend was accused of your murder. Now that you're back, you're going to start doing other stuff. It's like, that felt wrong to me. And that's where I started with the series. Just a guy who has been on the run for years and trying to hide where he was because he was accused of murder. And he fully realized the last time he was in prison, he didn't do that crime. So being innocent was not an excuse to not, it was not a reason to not be arrested and be put in jail. So he stayed on the run. And then when Iron Fist came back, obviously he wasn't dead. So he was no longer on the run. But at that point, he was like, I've been on the run all this time. Iron Fist came back and didn't even bother to look at me up or find me. And so he did not want to go back to New York. And that was the premise of starting that. And I think Tom DeFalco encouraged me in that direction, because a lot of people were like, let's have Luke Cage come back to New York. It's like, I think he wouldn't come back to New York. I think there would have to have something. There would be a lot of stuff that had to happen before he could want to go back on those stomping grounds, in my opinion. And so built that up and basically was telling a story of a guy who'd been so often burned. His best friend disappeared and didn't look him up. His family rejected him after he was in prison. And I got to go in and explore that. The fact that everybody knew that his name wasn't Luke Cage. That was not his name. In the first issue, that was established, but no one established what his actual name was. They just sort of forgot out to that point and said, oh, yeah, you're Luke Cage. So getting into that, and the reason he would keep that name, he needed a reason he would keep that name. And that was because his father told him not to. His father disowned him, essentially. So he didn't want to be his father's son. And they used that on and I was proud of it. They used that in the Netflix series, the second Netflix series, which I thought was cool. His father just, was disappointed in him. and he in prison was told that his mother died, and she did die, and so he never got out to be able to see her. Then his brother told him that his father died, and so they're both dead. And the brother said, "I don't want to ever talk to you, so don't look me up." And finds out in the course of the series that his father is alive, and his father just resented him for disappearing and never looking him up. And Cage resented his father for sort of disowning him and never writing him in prison. And meanwhile, the brother was the one that was in between it, that was taking care of the father and really disapproved of Luke Cage, of Carl Lucas.
I mean, in other genres, that would be a full story, but no, you got to throw superhero stuff in there too.
Yeah. Well, I tried to deal with the issues that I thought were relevant to the time. Racism, children being on the streets and sort of gathering together. There was that movie that came out that was about runaway kids who gathered together as a group. And I thought that was pretty powerful. That was more of a documentary, but just trying to talk about issues like that while also trying to get the psychology of a man who's always been on the run, who feels connected to no one, and in fact pushes people away. If he helps people because he's a good person, but he can't just help people because he's a good person, because he doesn't want to believe he's a good person, and he doesn't want other people to think he's a good person. So he's a hero for hire. He's a mercenary that only does good things, which is the same as a hero, except he's able to make a living, as opposed to Peter Parker, who does good things and starves.
Exactly. All right. So another question. All right. Do you, what was it, like 20 issues? Do you feel like you got everything you had to say about Luke Cage out? Or if they came to you today and said, "Hey, we're going to give you like a 4 or 5 issue series to give your final word on Luke Cage," would you go back and do it one more time just for?
I absolutely would. I mean, there was other stories that I had in mind to lead up to, and the last story arc, I was really proud of it. I felt like I was getting into my groove on the series by having the thing that went inside people and basically like the thing, it went inside people and took them over and made them do horrible things. And the last panel of the second issue, it entered Luke Cage. So now it's this guy that not only makes people do stuff, but has control over Luke Cage's body. And I thought that could go places. I felt like that could be a series that could be an arc that could go over 4 or 5 issues. But I did it, and basically they said the book's canceled, so you got to wrap that up. So there'd definitely be stuff that I wanted to. And the character, I mean, I wrote a character that was much more, I felt was much more conflicted about stuff. He had a lot of self-doubt. He was very powerful, but he was also very insecure. And he masked that insecurity by being a big tough guy. And I felt like that was valid. I don't know how much of that came through in the series, but he's a little bit different now. I've read the series that have come out after that, and I like them a lot. But it doesn't feel like the same character that I was writing. He's definitely not conflicted.
Oh yeah, I mean, you'd have a lot to play with today. I mean, he's mayor of New York right now.
Yeah. But I just feel like part of the stuff of his past, in comics, you basically, I'm going to address this one thing about my past, and now that story arc's done, and now I don't have that anymore. That's gone. It's like, that's not how life works.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's more of that stuff to explore. We make him actually come to terms with it, but I think they instead sort of skipped over it.
Yeah, that's like the downside of comics is like, yeah, you're enjoying something like someone's doing, like, you're getting into his past, then like the next writer picks up Luke Cage, and it's like, he's not going to do that. And it's like, I wanted to hear more about this, but yeah.
Well, I don't think, I wrote the whole series, so I was at least proud about that.
Yes.
That was the thing I wanted to do. But I don't think anybody when that series went away, the only feedback I got was, yeah, good. That Irish guy writing a black character isn't working.
Well, that's the other thing at that time, you know, the internet wasn't as big. You couldn't look you up and yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was funny. I mean, I've worked with people as an editor. I was working with people as an editor, and I would go out to conventions with Marvel and meet them. And a couple of them were like, wow, I didn't even know you were black. You know, I guess because of my voice. My voice doesn't sound like this, you know, like this, like you want to, like, so you can, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You can like say one thing one way and mean something another way.
It's like Marvel people you talk to on the phone. They're like, oh yeah, I didn't know you were black.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, I talked to them for years, but, you know, I didn't have my picture. And the only picture I had in a Marvel comic was when I did the assistant editor profile.
Oh, and the caricatures and stuff. Yeah.
And I don't know that you could tell my ethnicity in that, you know?
Oh, wow.
But I felt it looked like me, or at least felt like me. Steve Bucelato drew it. And I was pretty proud of it.
Yeah, I remember seeing those. Yeah, those were cool. Those were neat.
Definitely really good.
All right, Marcus, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for giving me your time. Again, I wanted to get to know you a little better because, you know, our last conversation, Dan and Greg kind of hogged the conversation. So,
yeah, I kind of fade into the background with those guys. I mean, Dan controls the conversation. He's really good at it. And Mark and Greg controls the conversation in a different way, just drawing attention to himself by being outrageous.
I mean, that's good for a podcast because, again, I don't want to sit here and not just have someone say, "Hey, did you do this?" Yeah.
Yeah.
No, those two are the opposite of that. All right, before we go, is there anything you want to promote? Any projects, any social media, website, anything?
I mean, I'm working on a book myself. That was originally an idea that I proposed at Marvel this is before Cowboys and Aliens came out, and it's not the same plot, but it is about aliens in the West.
Oh, wow. And
it was originally with like the Skrulls' first arrival on Earth.
Oh, wow.
And so then I've just changed it so it's an alien race, and there's a whole backstory with that, and why, you know, it's kind of like a cross between a buddy Western, because he meets a black cowboy, and a mystery, trying to figure out who this guy is and what he's about, and, you know, why he has this gun that looks like an old-fashioned 6-shooter but fires light that burns through somebody. So yeah, I'm having fun with it because it's gonna be all in watercolors, and I'm basically painting each panel one at a time.
So you're still working on it, so it's not going to be out.
It's not going to be out. Yeah, no. Definitely look for it before 2010.
2010.
I'm sorry, 2030.
Oh, there you go. So is there anywhere people can check on updates on that, like your social media or anything? Or
no, I don't have it on my social media. I will, because I'm not ready. I'm barely ready to talk about it, but yeah, I will. I'm at, my website is Idea Mechanics, IdeaMechanics.com. I have my X is at Idea Mechanics. My LinkedIn is at Idea Mechanics. My company is Idea Mechanics. Not advanced Idea Mechanics, just regular Idea Mechanics.
Just regular ideas. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Yes. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And again, when you're ready to promote it, let me know. We'll talk. We'll
absolutely. Talk. Thank you.
All right, everyone. The great Marcus McLaurin. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
All right.